The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the June 2018 SIGUX webinar. My name is Lori Fox. I'm the current chair of the SIGUX board and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. A few housekeeping items. By default, you are all muted. The session is being recorded and it will be posted on the SIGUX YouTube channel next week. You can ask questions using either the questions feature or the chat window. I'll be watching both of those. And if everyone could say hello so I know you can hear me, we'll get started with things in just a minute. Oh, hello, Nick. All right, excellent. So welcome to everyone today. I have just a little bit of SIGUX news for you before I hand it over to Beth. First, I want to tell you what's coming up in our SIGUX webinar series. We have a couple more dates for you. In just a few weeks, we have a webinar called Enhancing the Performance of Cross-Functional Teams. We'll actually be announcing that next week, so you can sign up as early as next week. In August, Bethlyn Nolan is going to do a webinar of how to create an effective poster, which is really geared towards people who are presenting posters this fall, but it's good for anyone. She has a great graphic eye, and that's going to be a fantastic presentation. And then in September, we're going to have our annual conference First Timers webinar, where people who have never been to a SIGUX conference before or people who just want to get some inside scoop for the conference can join us to hear more about the conference. You've got just a couple more days if you have not nominated people for the SIGUX Awards. Those award nominations are all due at the end of June. The annual conference is coming up in October. We're going to be in Orlando, actually right on Disney property. The keynote speakers have been announced and they look fantastic. Jeff Salingo is going to talk about There Is Life After College. And Geraldine Fitzpatrick is an ACM distinguished speaker, and she's going to talk about a short history of human-computer interaction. Those both look fantastic. The pre-conference seminars have also been announced. We have a great opportunity to go on a Disney Business Behind the Magic tour, where they're going to be talking about customer service. We all know that Disney has legendary customer service, and there's a lot we can learn from it. And there is an opportunity through the Disney Institute to see different aspects of Disney customer service. Reaching for the Stars, becoming an inspirational leader. Actually, our webinar panelist today is a leader of that pre-conference seminar, one of the leaders. There's also a project management pre-conference seminar and a diversity pre-conference seminar. So those look really fantastic. Unfortunately, we were not able to stay at the Hollywood Tower Hotel, but we are going to be at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort. And as a resort guest, we have all the benefits of staying at Walt Disney World, including a direct transportation from the airport, bus service, and actually discount park tickets for Disney, and free parking at the hotel. Registration is open. Early pricing ends, I believe it's September 9th, but you can go to the website now and register for the fall conference. And I just wanted to remind you what a great opportunity it is to be able to join SIGUX. It's only $25 a year for membership, and there are some great conference and pre-conference seminar discounts. You also have access to the ACM Digital Library, which is a repository of all of our past conference presentations, and you can participate in the SIGUX mentoring program, which will start a new cohort after the fall conference. And here real quickly are just some ways to stay in touch with SIGUX. We have an active email listserv, Facebook community, and Twitter account. So now I'm going to change the presentation over to Beth Rugg. Beth, I see you.
You guys see my screen, Lori? Coming.
Here it is. Okay, so Beth, you're all good to go. I'm going to mute myself. Beth, I will keep an eye on the questions. I know sometimes it's hard to keep track of both. And if you get to a point where you're looking at feedback, I'll unmute myself and give you some help in that area.
Sounds great, Lori. Thank you so much.
Okay, here you
for
go.
all your help so far. All righty. So welcome, everybody. I'm really honored and thrilled to be talking to you about identifying IT core competencies. As Lori mentioned, my name is Beth Rugg. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Client Engagement at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. I have been here 4 years, and in reality, I'm part of a relatively new leadership team. Our CIO joined this university in 2013 and recruited half of his executives were all new from outside the organization. So we spent quite a bit of time just understanding our organization, reviewing our strengths and weaknesses, both technically and from a behavioral competency standpoint, and then trying to redesign what we wanted to have happen moving forward. And it's out of that work, which is where this presentation, I suppose, was born. So this idea about competencies, why do competencies matter? I think if you look at the EDUCAUSE top 10 issues and top 10 IT trends for the past several years, staffing is always in those top 10. I believe it's number 7 this year. It was number 8 last year. So to a certain extent, I believe if you can identify the competencies that you want, especially in your leadership, and you can recruit or develop those competencies, then overall your organization will be better and stronger. As I just mentioned, our CIO has been in place for 4 years, and with new leadership comes new changes and new expectations. So it's important to define what the competencies are that you're looking for in your team. I guess I want to emphasize that we're really talking about behavioral competencies, not so much the technical skills. We all know that we bring a certain amount of technical skills into those jobs, and those skills can be taught, they can be learned, and they will certainly be changed over time. And in some ways, that's the easy part of the journey, teaching technical skills. The behavioral competencies can be much more difficult to, number one, define. Number two, define them in such a way that there can be a shared vocabulary. And then number three, identify those competencies that are really critical for your organizational needs. So, technical competencies, yes, we need those, but we absolutely need to think about more the soft skill of behavioral competencies. A little bit more about why they can matter. If you take the time to define these competencies, it can help with your performance management. It will help everyone have a better understanding of the needs of the various jobs within an organization and what is required in order to advance. It can also help you focus your training and development. So when we dig into some of these competencies, some you need to recruit for because they really cannot be easily developed, but others can be developed, and you can put resources into developing them and developing your staff. I think if you can talk competently about competencies, and it will help you with your recruitment, with your training, and with your selection process. It will help you to better define what that good fit is all about. I think for those of us who've done interviewing or hiring, sometimes you sense, you know, the type of person that will be a good fit for your organization. But when you can learn to talk in terms of competencies, it really does help you clarify exactly what you're looking for. And I think for us, in some ways, the greatest benefit has been when we have members of our team who are looking to develop, we can more clearly and specifically tell them what they need to develop in order to be eligible to move on professionally in their career. So hopefully I've convinced you all that this idea of behavioral competencies matter. If I haven't, just feel free to chat that in, and I'll address any questions or concerns you have. So I want to talk a little bit about the process, about how you get to this idea of tackling and identifying these competencies. So first, let's talk about kind of the goals and your organizational culture. You have to think about your institutional needs and what your institution is trying to accomplish, because that will really affect what competencies are needed by your employees and by your staff. As I mentioned, we have a new CIO, and when we got a new CIO, he is all about innovation. He's all about being curious. He would like to be on the bleeding edge. So the competencies that any of his team need to possess are very different than perhaps other team leaders. You know, and I actually saw members of our team struggle because suddenly the pace of change was much greater, and they hadn't been required to be that adaptable in the past. And I really saw them struggle for a while in order to adjust to the new type of leadership and to the new culture that was being brought to them. So it's really important for you to think about what your organization and what your institution needs. Another example, think about a school that's in crisis, a school that's maybe seeing a declining enrollment. You're going to need people that are innovators, that are willing to think outside the box. Those skills and characteristics are very different from what one might need who's in a very established organization that's not feeling any external economic pressures. You know, there it may be really about customer service as opposed to innovative thinking. Those are just a few small examples of why you need to think about your institutional goals, your organizational goals, and what the culture is that exists within your organization. You need to define the behavioral competencies that are important for you. Near the end of this, I'll show you about 24 competencies. Sometimes the words vary slightly, but in general, I think as you look across different resources, different white papers, in general, the competencies are fairly similar, although the exact words may change. But it is important to define what the competencies are that you are looking for. All right, so I've thrown this term around, competencies. What do I really mean by that? Well, a competency is a cluster of related abilities, commitments, knowledge, and skills that enable a person to act effectively in a job or a situation. Competencies can be a way to identify what really makes a difference in performance on the job. They're characteristics that drive performance. And when it comes to competencies, you know, is it an art? Is it a science? In some ways, I think it's both. Sorry, I'm just going to adjust my camera a little bit here. I think certainly we can define them, but then how easy it is to recognize those competencies in any given individual can vary. You know, when we're talking about competencies, I think people will sometimes say, you know what, I know it when I see it. And that's okay, but it doesn't really help others understand what you're looking for. Sometimes people do have a deeper level of understanding, and they can say, I know what it is that I'm looking for. They can explain the competency. They know what to do. And they know what's missing, even though they may not be able to demonstrate it themselves. You know, when we're talking about competencies, we also might be talking about self-assessment, where an individual can see and identify how much of a competency they have. as you move through the maturity line, somebody might be able to say, I see it, and now I'm starting to do it. So this is where they're starting to just learn how to develop different competencies through hands-on performance, and that'll hands-on experience, which will affect and impact their job performance. And then ideally, you want somebody to say, yes, I can do this on the job and I can do it well. So again, the competencies, we're talking about behavioral characteristics, commitments, knowledge, and skills that enable a person to act effectively in their job.
Hey,
Something
Beth,
else to think about when you're, yeah.
Beth, I'm sorry. We have a question. So, how
Sure.
do you define the competencies? Like what does your HR department offer you? I saw on the slide that you can leverage to help people define their competencies.
Sure. Well, I guess I will be laying out 24 different competencies.
Okay.
And then, I mean, I guess if you're talking about a skills assessment or a self-assessment,
Yeah.
we actually have a chart. So in our performance evaluations, basically the manager can evaluate an employee on certain competencies that we feel are important. The employee does a self-assessment, and then you can talk about how much you agree or disagree. And then we actually have a document that will provide additional ways to grow or to develop in that competency.
Okay, thank you.
It's called an ITS Competency Development Guide. And that guide will point to different resources like books, articles, certifications, professional training, etc. So I think I can share some of this, Lori, after the webinar, if people are interested in seeing that.
All right, thank you.
So great question. Thank you. And some of it may become a little bit clearer as I kind of dig into the presentation. So just this idea of coaching and recruiting. So all things are not created equal. All competencies are not created equal. I think the, human resource specialists, professional development experts have identified in general competencies that you need to recruit for versus competencies that can be easily more developed. And I'll give you some more detail a little bit further into the presentation, but just be aware. Some things you can be developed, but other things it's really much easier to recruit for. Have you ever heard the idea of, developing somebody's strengths? So often I think as leaders, as managers, as team leads, we see weaknesses in people and we spend and invest a lot of time in developing weaknesses. And yet sometimes it may be wasted effort, right? Because it's honestly, it could be an area where they're just never going to grow that much. Is it better to invest in the strengths that somebody already has and to channel those strengths, right? So that's kind of this idea of coaching or recruiting. And again, we'll dig into this more. Another thing that we talked about was leadership and the progression. So not every role requires the same level of behavioral competencies. So what we've done is we've identified, I believe it's 16 competencies that we feel every member of our IT team should possess to some degree or another. So let's say I just earlier said there was 24 competencies. We identified 16 of those that we thought were important for our team. So we want everyone to have some competency, some level of acuity with these different competencies. But when we start talking about our technical leads, our managers, our assistant directors, and our directors, we want them to shine in certain competencies. And again, I'll give you more detail as to what that looks like. So we're trying to clearly define what it takes in order to excel and progress in your career by highlighting what competencies each level within the organization should excel at, if that makes sense. And this is really important because that way when somebody says, I want to be a manager, or why is so-and-so a manager and I'm not? Of course, there's always technical skills that apply to that, but in many ways, the distinctions, the deciding factors are probably some behavioral competencies that one person has that another person may not possess to the same degree. Now, we can also dig into this a little bit where, as part of our performance management, we'll say, well, you're at a 1, but we want you to be at a level 4 in order to progress to the next level within the organization, right? So again, we're recognizing that there's always differences in how competent someone might be, but we're trying to say, you can develop, let's see you develop until you're ready to move on to the next level of responsibility within the organization. Here, I just want to mention real quick, obviously, we're not working in a vacuum. We did work with our HR department and actually with the system. We actually worked with a consultant as well to define the competencies and to make sure that it maps strategically to the institutional goals and to come up with the resources to help people develop. This idea of socializing and integrating, in some ways, I think this is one of the more difficult parts of this journey. So if you go through this effort of trying to define the competencies, of trying to provide the resources to support development, it really has to become part of your day-to-day life. If it's just some information that lives on a piece of paper that we look at once a year, it's not going to be very helpful. And yet, how often do we really have these types of conversations with either ourselves, with our supervisors, with our managers, with our directors? Not often, right? I mean, how many of you meet biweekly with somebody? Are you talking about these behavioral competencies, or does it just come up once a year during the annual review? I think we're still, even though we've done a certain body of work regarding this, we could still improve as far as making this part of our day-to-day life. Okay, so here are the competencies. In some ways, this is really the meat of the presentation. So I think you can see there's 24 different competencies that are in these little boxes on the screen. The ones in green are the competencies that we at UNC Charlotte identified as being important for our team members. So adaptability, building trust, customer loyalty, coaching, communication, continuous learning, initiative, innovation, plan and organizing work, problem solving, team focus, thorough, and visionary. Those are the competencies we expect each one of our team members to have, and actually have documentation that can clearly define what each of these categories mean. And I'm happy to share that as well at the end of the webinar. Then you can also see in this grid, the little stars. Those are the competencies that in general research has shown us are hard to develop. So you really should be trying to recruit for those. Now, what I mean by that is you can actually ask questions that will help you identify whether the candidate possesses that certain trait. So we also have interview questions that we provide to our leadership team so that directly map to these different competencies. Right, so of course I can't lay my hand on it right when I'm looking for it, but I do have questions that would help to identify whether or not somebody has adaptability as a competency. And then the other thing you can see on this image is that we've identified which competencies we want our leads to possess, really be excelling at, versus our assistant directors. Our managers versus our assistant directors versus our directors. So the idea is these competencies, as you progress through your career, they're building on each other. And that as a new lead, you may assess yourself at being a level 1 when it comes to team focus. But my guess is after a year, when we come to look at that again, you would probably have progressed to a 2 or a 3, because over time, you would have been building up a lot of experiences that would help you have this team focus. And that then when you want to go to apply for the manager job, we would know that you've already demonstrated that you have team focus, that you're thorough, and that you're a problem solver. And you would know that as you as you apply for this new job, maybe you haven't had an opportunity to show a lot of initiative, but that's going to be an expectation as a manager. So you're going to look to see how have you demonstrated initiative, and then know that is an expectation for you if you were to get that role. So, Lori, are there any questions about just these general competencies? My guess is some of you may identify other competencies that you and your organization need that we did not identify.
There are no questions, although I can tell you, Nick and I are from the same college, and we're having our own little side conversation about how exciting this is, and it's something we want to do in our department already. And you haven't finished your presentation.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, I think, I'm trying to, I'm reading from my notes, and but when I speak from my heart, I think the most damage can come when people, what do we often do? Somebody excels technically in a position, so then we put them into a leadership role. And that leadership role may require different skills and competencies that they cannot excel at.
Right.
And I think that is very sad for everyone involved. I think it's sad for the employee, and I think it's sad for the organization, right? Because it didn't need to happen. So I think if we can become more astute at understanding the role or the impact of competencies and of behavior on leadership and on organizations, it really can be a win for everybody. I know I have members on my team that were moved. I'm sure this has happened to each one of you, right? People were moved in positions that they just didn't have the background that they just shouldn't have been put into. And then they struggle. And it's almost like shame on us for doing it to them, right? It shouldn't have happened.
Right. And you're
like
getting
that,
lots of agreement in the chat right now.
And I know when even I did this at, SIGUX, but that idea is when we're talking to people who want to make us do things like that, if we can start talking with this vocabulary, saying, they're not really demonstrating the type of competencies that we want in our managers or the type of competencies that we want our leaders. Yes, they know how to program X, Y, and Z, or yes, they know how to code, or yes, they know how to maintain a server. But I need people who are innovative. I need people who can think outside the box, or I need people who can build trust. I mean, look at building trust. That one is not easy to develop.
Right.
That's almost an innate thing. And like when I came into my role, this was a new role for this organization. It was intentionally called engagement. So can you imagine what would have happened if they selected someone who did not have this competency of building trust? It wouldn't have worked. Or maybe it will work, but it wouldn't have been successful. So I think it really is an important way to think, especially as we think in terms of people and their career and selecting the right candidate for any given position or opening.
I think too,
So
sometimes when you're struggling in a position, it's even hard to describe what you're struggling in, but knowing the competencies and using that vocabulary helps.
Exactly. And I have sat down with members of my team, both, the line staff and my managers, and it kind of depersonalizes the conversation, because you can look through the competencies and say, hey, listen, so you know what, you're doing a great job identifying, solving problems, but it seems like you're struggling to organize your work. And as much as that can become a shared vocabulary, it depersonalizes what could be a difficult conversation. And especially when oh, and by the way, do you agree? So here's some resources. Or, well, maybe let's talk to HR. Maybe you can get in this course. This might help with that. I actually believe and know that's going on with one of our employees who would like to be promoted. And the idea is, it needs to gain some experience, some different types of experiences before the person will be successful. So it's not that we're not going to do that. It's just that we've had those difficult conversations or courageous conversations, and now we're doing the development work so that this individual will be eligible in the future.
That's fantastic.
So this next slide, well, and this is, I'm telling you the ideal. Of course, we struggle each and every day. Just what's up on the slide next. So I just wanted to show you specifically how we've mapped this for our organization. So here you can see, you know, our institutional objectives: delivering exceptional results, building capability and alignment, building value, and working together. So at an institutional level, so a strategic level, those are our objectives. So then we map these behavioral competencies to those objectives. And then the S and the S means that they're difficult to develop, so you should select for them. And the D means that they can be developed. So, you know, we said, so in order for our organization to meet these institutional objectives, we want people who can identify and solve problems, who can plan and organize work, who can execute thoroughly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's probably an opportunity for an interesting discussion around these competencies and to see if the group agrees, you know, oh, you're right. It is hard to teach somebody how to execute thoroughly. You know, yes, I do agree with that it is something you should select for, that it's not easily developed. Because my guess is some of the people on this webinar may agree or disagree. I do think this was information that came from our consultant, so I think it is research-based, but nonetheless, experience is always interesting to discuss as well. So this is just how we've mapped. So these are our 16 competencies and how they map to the institutional objective. And again, depending where your institution's at, you may need different competencies. And then this is just a little bit closer look at the specific competencies that we want the leads, the managers, the associate directors, and the directors to excel at. So they do build on top of each other. You know, and I think they make sense, right? So for lead, so a line employee wants to become a technical lead. So we want them to be able to work as a team. That makes sense. We want them to identify and solve problems, probably why they're a team lead, and to plan and organize work and to execute thoroughly, right? Once they've demonstrated those competencies, then if they want to become a manager, then we want to take in that customer focus, right? We want them to show initiative and to be able to attract and develop people. Now that one's always fun, right? Because until you get a manager job, then you don't necessarily have the opportunity to attract or develop people. But I think in our organization, we're like, yeah, sure, we get that, but you're good on the other two. And then we'll bring you in as a manager, know that we're going to be focusing and helping you develop that ability to attract and develop people. And then once those competencies are demonstrated, then we can look to associate director and director. So again, we expect everyone to have some level of all these competencies, but for leadership, there are differentiators and they build upon themselves. Any questions about that?
I don't see any questions.
All righty. So I'm just looking through some of my notes here. I referred to, again, when we do the performance and the kind of assessments, we do have a rating level of rating 1 through 4. So that's where, you know, I can do a self-assessment and rate myself. My team lead would do that assessment. And then the goal is to get to a level 3 or 4, you know, prior to promotion. You know, so to a certain extent, that's some of the high level thinking about competencies. I hope I've been able to convince you that it is important to think not just about technical skills, but to think about behavioral competencies. I hope I've been able to be clear that the competencies are important. They're one part of the job here. They are behavioral in nature, and depending on what your role is, you know, your level of, you know, the competencies may value, and the skill with which you demonstrate these competencies may value. It is up to you and to your organization to figure out which ones apply. There's no one size fits all when it comes to this. And then I would encourage you to kind of work with human resources to provide identify resources available to both your managers, your leadership, and your line employees so they know how they can develop. And then come up with the appropriate job aids and development opportunities for your employees. We also, like I said, I have, sheets of definitions for what these competencies mean, because it's always important to talk about, to have them clearly defined. And I also have some information about questions, interview questions. This is what I was looking for earlier. So, for example, if I was trying to recruit for adaptability, I might say something like, tell me about a situation in which you had to adjust quickly to a significant change in an organization, department, or a team. How did that change affect you, and what did you do? That answer would give me a lot of information about how adaptable someone is. Here's one for building trust. Give me an example of a time when you worked to develop a relationship with a customer. What did you do? And why was this an important relationship? So you can figure out, have they been in a situation where they really had to develop trust? Communication. Describe a time when you had to convey important information to an individual or group. What was the situation? What was your approach? What was the outcome? So lots of resources, lots of information. To be successful in IT, we need both. We need the technical skills and we need the behavioral competencies. And in some ways in which the nature of our IT organization is changing, I might argue that some of these behavioral competencies are becoming more and more important. And it's also important to have a balanced team. So my strengths really lie in building trust, customer loyalty, communication. When I work with my peer and colleague in infrastructure, those may not be his strengths, but together we really are able to build a strong team of IT leadership. So that's what I have. Thank you for listening.
I've got a couple questions for you. So are these competencies based on Lominger, Lominger? Lominger? I don't know how to say that. What are the?
I'm not sure. I just pulled up on the screen. I could get back to you, Lori. We work with Connie Freeman and Leader Insights to help us develop these particular competencies. So I'd have to look and just see if there's overlap or where she might have pulled them from. Okay. But it was Lominger,
Lominger. Lominger?
Okay. I'll look and see if I can answer that question.
And we had a comment a little while ago too. Someone said, we believe we can train for technical skills, but the soft skills are difficult to train for. They must really have them already as core competencies. So are these, do you?
I mean, I guess I would disagree. Mm-hmm.
You do? Oh, you think there are some that you can train some of these or develop?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Are people?
Absolutely.
So let's say you and I work in the organization. Are my competencies like treated confidentially? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it part of the review process, or does everybody know that Lori's great at initiative or whatever? I mean, like, how openly do you talk about these?
No. We talk about the competencies in general terms. So in the sense that, basically this is what we're going after as an organization. These are the competencies that we feel like all of our employees should possess. So we talk about it globally, but when it comes down to the individuals, no, that's a confidential discussion between individuals there.
Yep. Okay. And what's the buy-in like throughout your organization? Do you have any individuals that don't buy in to the concept?
Well, I'm smiling because of course we do.
What do you do about it?
Sure. Well, it's like, anything. Number one, I think you've got to have a leader. So your CIO or vice chancellor of IT, whatever that leader position is, needs to buy in on this, right? If they don't believe in it, if they don't buy into it, you're going to have a hard time pushing it through an IT organization. Because end user support, the people who are involved in SIGUX, right? We tend to be the ones who deal with the customers, who deal with the real life human beings, who deal with the faculty, staff, and students. So I think we're going to be on the front end of understanding competencies and how they might affect our work. But there's other members of our teams that are not quite on that front line, right? So I would say for our organization, infrastructure, security, sysadmin, system administrators, they're not necessarily going to be on the hook for believing in this, right? They, as long as they're technically astute and competent, it may not be quote unquote a requirement for their job, or they're not going to buy into it. So I think as much as your executive can champion this idea, that's really important, because otherwise you'll be banging your head against the wall. My guess is, project management offices, it's going to be an easier sell. Service desk, frontline support is going to be an easier sell. And like I said, infrastructure, security, DBAs, a harder sell. So,
Okay.
but, I mean, to a certain extent, any buy-in that can help, I think, move the needle a little bit is good. And I actually think I still go back to EDUCAUSE, top 10 issue, staffing, right, and professional development. So we can choose to ignore it, but I don't think we're going to be solving any of our problems if we choose to ignore it. But I do think you need that senior leader buy-in to really help an organization to adopt this outlook.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, Beth, thank you so much. Definitely some enthusiastic yeses with 3 and 4 exclamation points and agreeing 100%. And thank you for the great presentation. Oh, one question here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
How long has your department been following this program?
Oh, just still in our infancy, about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
About 2 years, and we're still growing. I mean, in some ways, I still think we're, in the early phases of really making this, integrating it within our culture. And again, different leaders are going to. I think where it is of the most value right now is when we have internal candidates who want to be promoted into leadership positions. Right.
Because you're really talking about it more quantitatively. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. But if you talk to anybody who's just coming in doing their job 9 to 5, it's probably going to have, they probably will say that it has limited impact at this point, unless of course there's a problem, right?
Right.
If ever you're having, a difficult issue with a team member, then my guess is there's more focus on some of this language and this idea of competency.
Have you used any metrics to track the efficacy of the program? Probably not yet.
We have not. No,
you'll get there.
I think it's a great question. All about metrics, but yeah, not yet. Just trying to get buy-in still.
Well, it's fantastic, and you're so lucky.
Well, it's a good foundation, I think, to have. We're actually going through a IT assessment right now. So we're a large university, 29,000 students, 4,000 faculty, staff, with centrally and distributed IT. So we're undergoing an IT assessment. We have an outside consultant who's been looking at the whole IT organization and trying to make recommendation for the future. What should the future IT organization look like? Because some of our UNC system policies are changing. The system is looking to have one person responsible, who reports to the chancellor, which probably means the CIO, directly responsible for all information security, which in a distributed environment like ours is very difficult. So changes are coming. Not sure what that change is going to look like, but I am sure that this will be a part of the conversations we have, whenever these changes are made.
And your adaptability will come in handy.
Oh, you got to know it. You got to believe it. Yep, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Beth, and thank you for everyone who attended today. Like I said earlier in the webinar, this will be available next week on our YouTube channel. Everybody have a great 4th of July.
Thank you.